105.5 WDHA on a Sunday morning here on the Jersey Magazine. And my guest is a 16-year veteran of the National Basketball Association. He played part of 4 seasons with the New Jersey Nets when they were still here in New Jersey before moving to Brooklyn. And he played 3 seasons with the New York Knicks. Chris Dudley, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good to be here. Thanks, Jim.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of things. One is you were the first player in the National Basketball Association with type 1 diabetes. You weren't diagnosed, if I remember correctly, until the age of 16.
Yes.
As a high school kid, what kind of challenges did that present for you?
Well, so that was dating myself here, but that was back in 1981. And the technology around diabetes was nowhere where it is today. And so it was tough. I was a sophomore. It was after my basketball season, my sophomore year, and got the classic symptoms, which are that you're incredibly thirsty. You have to go to the bathroom all the time. And basically that's because your blood sugar is going up. Your insulin's what breaks down the carbohydrates or sugar in your body. And when you get type 1, you no longer do that or do it to the same capacity. So your blood sugar is elevating. And so your body's trying to flush it out. So drinking everything. And of course, a lot of times you'll drink the wrong thing, which has has sugar in it or whatever it was back in Tang or whatever we were drinking, And so my dad's brother, my uncle, had type 1 diabetes. So my dad recognized some of the symptoms, took me to the hospital, and I was off the charts blood sugar wise, and found out I had type 1 diabetes. And at that time, diabetes was not as well known, and it was devastating. I thought my dream was to, even though I wasn't that good at the time, but my dream was to be to play basketball for as long as I could. And I thought it was going to be, I didn't know what that meant. The first thing I asked the doctor is, am I going to live? And by that, I didn't necessarily mean a week or 2 weeks, but I meant, what does this mean? Because the lifespan was shorter at that time when you had diabetes. And second question, which I won't say was equally as important, but it was right up there, was, can I still play basketball, still play sports? And I was fortunate because he said yes. And that wasn't always the case at that time. At that time, some doctors were saying, back off, the risk reward isn't worth it, don't exercise. And it was just kind of starting to change. And then back in, and you may remember this, but back in at that time, I was a Philadelphia Flyer. I lived in Philly till I was 12. Okay. And before I came out to San Diego. And so I was a big Flyers fan. And Bobby Clark had diabetes, had type 1 diabetes. And so that was huge for me to know that this guy can play Hall of Fame hockey you play hockey at that level, having it, that made a big impact on me.
You mentioned Philadelphia, and at about the same age as when I'm originally from New York City, but lived for a number of years in King of Prussia. Okay. So we have similar roots, and I obviously remember Bobby Clark very, very well. As you got older and you're playing in college, and then you end up in the NBA, how did you manage the diabetes, and how did it affect you as a player at that level?
It is tough, and again, it's just the technology's come so far. But back then, I would, on game days, and you had a good relationship with the trainer. And so the trainer would have a test kit on the bench. He would know if I needed anything. I would have juice or whatever I might need to bring up. Because with diabetes, you're trying to regulate your blood sugar. So through taking shots of insulin. And when you do that, you can go too high or too low. If you go too low, that's really dangerous, and that you could potentially pass out or have a seizure or something like that. And too high, you just don't feel good, and there's a lot of problems with that as well. So you're trying to do that balancing act. And on game day routine, and I would test my blood sugar as many as 16 times that day, just trying to really have it dialed in and really understand. Now I have what's called a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, where I can look on my phone and it can tell me what my blood sugar is. But back then you had to, test your blood sugar one strip at a time, and you get those little snapshots of where where it was. And the problem is with diabetes is there's so many variables. There's the how much insulin you put in your body, but then what you're eating. But adrenaline can mess it up, and there's a lot of other factors that can elevate it. And as you can imagine, as you know, when you're playing a game and going out in front of 20,000 people, you're kind of amped up, and that adrenaline can spike, and then it can drop you. And anyway, so there's a lot of different variables. And I'd say, and we have a camp that we've done for 25 years for kids with diabetes. And one of the things is, whether it's your coach, for kids, it's not they don't necessarily have a trainer, but it's their coach or whatever. Make sure they understand what you're going through. Make sure they understand that if you say, hey, I got to go test my blood sugar, you're not trying to get out of something, it's legitimate. And, but just have that, and if you do that and people understand, and fortunately I was able to play for 16 years.
Chris Dudley, you mentioned 16 years, 16-year veteran of the NBA, our guest this morning here on the Jersey Magazine at 105.5 WDHA. So when did you put together the Chris Dudley Foundation?
So my wife and I came up with the idea. I was playing in Jersey, and I left, I think it was 93, 94, signed with Portland. It was at that time we were signed a contract that gave me some security, and I always wanted to give back, and we started a foundation. And then one of the things that we had a couple areas that we want to focus on, but one of them in particular was diabetes. And I'd been asked, as a lot of players are, do you want to do a basketball camp during the summer? And then kind of combine the two. And I would also get letters all the time from parents, and how do you play basketball with having diabetes? Johnny or Jill or whatever, they're trying to do it. And what's your routine? What do you do? And so I thought, all right, let's put this together. Let's have a basketball camp just for kids with type 1 diabetes and allow them to, obviously it's a basketball camp. We have coaches there and do everything a regular basketball camp does, but I also focus on the diabetes side and talk about it. And what do you do? How are you able to compete at a high level with having diabetes? And so it was a huge success, and we pretty much had a waiting list every year. And one of the things that over time you realize is it wasn't just the basket. I mean, the basketball is great. The learning about how to take care of yourself is great. But for a lot of these kids, it was really connecting with other kids who are dealing with the same thing. It's so hard at that age. And our kids are boys and girls, 10 through 17, to feel different, to deal with something where they feel, they feel embarrassed by it or whatever it might be, just to and go the ups and downs and inevitably come with taking care of it, to realize, hey, there's a lot of other kids cross country who are pretty cool, who like basketball also, who are dealing with the exact same thing I am. That's really been a huge part of camp. And now with today's world, social media, they're able to stay in touch all year. And it's really heartwarming, the stories we hear of how they connect and help each other throughout the year.
We're talking with Chris Dudley this morning on the Jersey Magazine, a 16-year NBA veteran, the first NBA player to play with type 1 diabetes. He spent part of 4 years with the Jersey Nets when they were still here in New Jersey, and another 3 seasons with the Knicks. Chris, one of the other things that I wanted to speak with you about is an experience with your parents. Obviously, COVID-19, it's affecting every single one of us in some way, shape, or form. Talk to us about what you've gone through with your parents.
Yeah, I'll give you the kind of, not too long, but story of how we got there. So I started with a company called Diabetomics in 2011. As you can tell by the name, it focused on some testing for diabetes, among other things. Has had some proprietary technology that when COVID started, our CEO, our founder, our chief scientist had said, hey, we can develop an antibody test for COVID. And the board endorsed that and said, yeah, let's do that. There's going to be a real need. So, and basically the antibodies it shows you either get antibodies to take the vaccine, or if you've had the disease, if you've had COVID, your body naturally develops antibodies. And so what's happened is you fast forward and people have gotten vaccinated, and my parents included. They'd gotten their double dose of whichever one they took. But over time, those antibodies that protect you from getting the disease, they lessen over time. And this is not controversial to say this, in that that's the booster. That's why they're pushing so hard for people to get the booster right now. The problem has been that sometimes people have a false sense of confidence, as though I got vaccinated, I'm good, I can, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm going out, whatever. And, talked to my parents about that. And I said, well, let me test you. And neither one of them showed antibodies. Now, on our test. Now, they still had some antibodies. You still have some that are present, and there's memory cells, and without getting too complicated with it. But there's still some protection, and still some protection against worst case. But you're much more vulnerable to if you get exposed to COVID, to getting it. And for someone in their 80s, especially with my parents, some underlying conditions, is, frankly, most people in their 80s have. It was like, wait a second, you got to get the booster, and you got to get it as soon as possible, and in the meantime, protect yourself. Just treat it as you're not as protected as you thought you were. And that's really one of the problems that you're seeing, is that people get a false sense of confidence. I mean, yes, the vaccine does great things, and there's a lot of positive things, obviously, from the vaccine, but don't think you're invincible now that you've gotten a vaccine. In the state of Oregon, 30% of new cases are from people who are vaccinated. So it's very prevalent across the board, and you're seeing it all the time. In the sports world, we're seeing it all the time. In the NFL, I think they're going to have more COVID cases right now than they had last year. And last year they didn't have the vaccine. So you can still get it. And even myself, I did it myself, and I was not showing the antibodies. And so I got the booster, and now I'm showing the antibodies.
Are your parents difficult when it comes to going to a doctor, or are they readily, yes, I'll go?
They were readily, they were shocked they got a little scared by it. And they're very cautious. And so, yeah, they went in and they got it right away.
I'm typical male. I don't go to the doctor until it's absolutely necessary. My mom, she had passed away a couple of years ago, but boy, Chris, she fought going to the doctor left and right. Maybe that's where I get it from. I don't know.
Yeah, I think my wife's the same way. A lot of people do not like hospitals and do not, so try to make it as easy as possible.
And speaking of easy, the antibody test looks like it's very, very simple.
Yes, it's a saliva-based test, and so all you do is you put a swab in your upper gum line, swab and flip it, swab in the lower gum line. Then you put it in the solution, and then you put the solution on a cassette. And in fact, this is one here that was mine. And then you wait 15 minutes, and either you have 2 bars or you have 1. And if you have 2 bars, that means you're antibody positive. If you don't show any line, then you're not showing antibodies. And then if that's the case, you could still have some, but they could be, like in my case, I still had some, but they were extremely low. And thus it made sense to get the booster.
How much do you follow the NBA these days, Chris?
Oh, I still follow it. I still follow it pretty regularly. And I'm on the West Coast. Obviously I'm partial to New York, New Jersey, as I played in both places, have relations and still in both organizations. Tom Thibodeau was my assistant coach when I played for the Knicks, so I love seeing him. They've been struggling a little bit lately, but I love seeing that he really got them back on the map and playing great basketball. And then, of course, the Nets. It's fun watching them in their throwback jerseys, doing great things. And it'll be interesting to see how they can do this year.
I have a friend who's been in the front office of the Nets for a number of years, a guy named Paul Camrus, who you may remember. Paul and I worked together in radio a number of years ago, and then we both spent a couple of seasons in minor league baseball with the now defunct, unfortunately, Newark Bears.
Okay.
And he's been there with the Nets for a long time and made the transition across the river. For DHA listeners who want information about the COVID-19 antibody testing, the website is covab.com. That's COVAB.com. And then your website, chrisdudley.org, for all the information on your foundation. Chris, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning here in the Jersey Magazine. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I really appreciate it. Best to you. Thank you.